the Visegrad region and the war in Ukraine. Lessons in foreign information manipulation and interference. How is Russian propaganda picturing the war against Ukraine? And how is this happening specifically in the Visegrad region? This project intends to answer this particular question with a bit of a twist. Please allow me to give a bit of an introduction first. We know a lot about how the Soviet propaganda functioned abroad. It was conducted and managed by the KGB, while the strategic guidance was provided by the Politburo, so the Central Committee of the Communist Party. Thereafter, these centrally decided propaganda messages were distributed abroad according to detailed plans. The contemporary Russian Federation has been conducting intensive propaganda campaigns against European countries, as well as against several other states already for more than 15 years. One may remember how Moscow tried to legitimize the attack on Georgia in August 2008, or the illegal occupation and annexation of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in spring 2014. Since the late 2010s, the phenomenon is widely called as foreign information manipulation and interference, FIMI in short. This terminology has been adopted both by the European Union and also NATO. And there has been plenty of research conducted about how this propaganda, or FIMI, had functioned in detail. One may mention, among many others, Peter Pomerantsev's book Nothing is True and Everything is Possible, or the works of Keir Giles, Katri Pynoniemi, Maxine Odinet, Jessica Aro, and many other scholars and experts. Particularly about the war in Ukraine, one may mention the expert team of the Stop Fake, who have been debunking Russian FIMI about Ukraine ever since 2014. Several colleagues here in Central Europe worked on this topic too. The Globsec Policy Institute in Slovakia has conducted an in-depth research about the vulnerability of the Visegrad countries to Russian propaganda, so of Poland, Czechia, Slovakia and Hungary. The Center for Eastern Studies, OSW, operating in Warsaw, studied how the Russian state television has been spreading propaganda messages in wartime, and also Russia's strategy of subversion and disinformation. In Hungary, the political capital think tank has researched Russian information warfare extensively, while in Czechia, for example, the Association for International Affairs, in short AMO, has mapped out the functioning of Russia's malign information operations. All in all, there has been plenty of knowledge accumulated on the national level already. So what is the novelty of this particular project then? Why did we decide to do it? As we said before, there have been plenty of national studies conducted about how Russian FIMI functions in a given country. Hence we decided to do something different, something more unique. We intended to prove that Russian propaganda functions in a centralized way all over the Visegrad region. We intended to prove that what we knew about the Soviet propaganda is still true today, namely that it functions in an absolutely centralized way. In other words, not just the strategic narratives are the same, which have been widely known already, but also the individual narratives used in the Visegrad region. Hence what we did was that we chose a few key events of the full-scale war in Ukraine starting from 2022. We intended to analyze how the Russian FIMI apparatus reacted to unforeseen developments and how they are trying to frame it by information means. It's an important detail that we looked at unforeseen developments, so such events that surprised also Russia. Predictable or long-planned events would not have served the purpose, because Moscow has had the time to elaborate detailed communication plans, as the Kremlin has done also with framing the launch of the full-scale war. You all certainly remember the key narratives, the need for denazifying Ukraine, or to stop the genocide against Russian speakers, and so on. We needed something else. We needed spontaneous events that surprised also Russia, thus put the Russian FIMI apparatus under pressure if they wanted to explain what happened and shift the blame away from Russia. Hence first, we identified the main communication channels of Russian FIMI in the 4 Visegrad countries. We identified those websites through which the Kremlin narratives have been spreading. Thereafter, we chose 3 important events from the early period of the full-scale war. We chose 3 such events that Moscow did not expect to happen, or did not expect to generate as much international attention as they did. so the Russian female apparatus could not have prepared detailed communication plans. The three key events we identified are the bombing of the maternity hospital in Mariupol, 9th of March 2022, uncovering of the Bucha massacre from 1st of April 2022 on, and blowing up the Novakhovka dam, which resulted in a major disaster on the 6th of June 2023. And here comes the trick, the methodological novelty. We mapped out what narratives has Russia used in the 4 Visegrad countries, and also the order of how these narratives appeared. The assumption has been that if the same narratives appear in all 4 Visegrad countries and approximately in the same order, this means that a fully centralized propaganda apparatus has been working in all 4 countries. What we found was that the Russian FIMI channels, the propaganda apparatus, covered these events exactly as we presupposed. They used largely the same narratives everywhere in all the 4 countries. We will explain more in detail in the study to be published, but as an example, let's look at the bombing of the Mariupol maternity hospital in March 2022. What happened was that the Russian combat aircraft bombed the number 3 city hospital in Mariupol, which functioned as a children's hospital and a maternity ward. Russian officials, including Ambassador to the United Nations Vasily Nebenzia and spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry Maria Zakharova, made claims already before the attack that Ukraine emptied the hospital and used it as a firing position, and thereafter came the attack. Once the scandal broke out, Russia used several narratives to either justify the attack or deny her involvement, by questioning Zelensky's words that the Mariupol maternity ward was functioning during the attack, or claiming that the attack was a Ukrainian provocation and no Russian airstrike happened, or stating that the damage to the building is not consistent with an airstrike, or that the building was a legitimate target, as it was already functioning as an Azov base, or the wounded mother was played by a well-known Ukrainian blogger, or no targeted Russian strikes on hospitals happened in general. And these narratives were repeated by the pro-Russian FIMI channels in all 4 Visegrad countries. The same explanations were used in all 4 countries. Similar patterns were visible in the case of the other 2 studied events too. So what are the key findings of our projects? The first one is that Russian FIMI used the same narratives in all 4 Visegrad countries to frame the studied events, and did so in mostly the same timely order with only very minor alterations. There was not much specific reflections to the individual national characteristics of the V4 countries. Second, Russian FIMI narratives often contradicted also each other. In the case of Mariupol, Russia both denied the attack, saying that it never happened or that it's a Ukrainian provocation, and also said that it was justified, and did all these at the same time. The objective has not been to convince the audience, but to confuse. This is the phenomenon often called the fire hose of falsehood. So to flood the information environment with several parallel, often contradicting narratives, so in the end no one could know what the truth actually was. And the third finding is that the absence of any alternative explanations. In other words, even if not all Russian propaganda channels have repeated all narratives, but none of them came up with any other explanation, anything outside the frameworks of the Kremlin narratives either. The absence of any alternative, not pro-Kremlin explanations to the given event, constitutes another indicator that identified disinformation channels work with very close coordination with the Kremlin, thus there is not much room for free speech or alternative opinions. And though this project is now ready, and only a full-scale academic study is yet to be published, please remember, the work is not complete. The threat posed by the foreign information manipulation and interference prevails and will prevail. It will certainly continue coming from Russia, but also from other countries, as well as from non-state actors. Hence, a continuous awareness is necessary, and we constantly need to update our knowledge on the information threats. Thank you. And once again, we would like to express our gratitude to the International Visegrad Fund for supporting this project. Thank you again.